Leave your Bibles open there, and I didn't want Larry to have to read the entire thing, so we're going to read the next few verses here, verses 6 through 9. Let's just pick up right there. When Jesus saw him lying there, and knew he had already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, Do you wish to get well? Sick man answered, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, another steps down before me. Jesus said to him, Get up, pick up your pallet, and walk. Immediately the man became well and picked up his pallet, began to walk. Now it was the Sabbath on that day. Get up and walk. I heard those words about 8 hours after my back fusion from a therapist. Now, I sort of kindly told him he could leave my room. And, whatever else I said to him is kind of fuzzy, since I was on so much medication. But just don't ask Deanne. But here's the thing. Can we imagine being told, get up and walk by a stranger after not being able to walk for 38 years? Have you ever imagined what this man is thinking? We know these verses, Matthew 19:26, with God all things are possible. And then Luke adds in Luke 1:37, nothing is impossible with God. So whenever the Bible says the same thing, it's obviously doubly important. But here's one of the main lessons that I want us to get for the day, and it's this. The word impossible should not belong in the vocabulary of a Christian. But here's our problem. We let our logical assumptions trump our theological beliefs. And before we know it, our reality is defined by human assumptions rather than divine revelation. In other words, if we can't see how something is possible, what do we normally conclude? It's impossible. But here's the truth. Jesus can make our impossible possible. Now, will He? I can't answer that. Can He? I can't answer that question. Yes, He can. Yes, He can. While Jesus was traveling to Jerusalem, He makes this detour while He's there in Jerusalem to Bethsaida to meet the needs of these people. Now, here's what I want us to try to picture in our minds here. Jesus walking among the suffering people. Because He didn't have to. Because you see, remember in verse 1, He's going for a feast. He's going to a party. But instead, He makes a detour and finds all of these people who are in need. And He does all of that because He loved them. Most people would have walked away from them, walked around them, ignored them because they had a party to go to. I mean, who in the world would want to mingle with all these helpless people? Jesus did. Jesus did. You'll never walk again. Those words, can you imagine how many times those echoed in the mind of this man after 38 years? Now, Scripture does not reveal to us how it happened, but the invalid hadn't been able to stand on his own 2 feet for almost 4 decades. That's a long time by any measure. But it must have seemed even longer than that 2,000 years ago. And I didn't know this, putting this lesson together. Did you know that the life expectancy back in that day was only 28 years? I don't see a 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 people in here that'd still be alive. But here's the point. That invalid, he's past his prime. In fact, he's living on borrowed time. And maybe you wonder if that's why Jesus singled him out. I mean, he had been sitting by that pool for so long that, he had to have been giving up hope. Now, the parentheses, if you'll notice, in most versions, the latter part of verse 3 and also verse 4. Now, the belief among the Jews was this, that the moving of those waters was caused by an angel. And the first one to get into the water after that pool was stirred up would be healed. Scholars say this, that it was a spring-fed pool and the spring would bubble up from time to time. So whatever you want to believe on that, it does not matter to me one way or the other, because it doesn't change the message of this story at all. But this invalid, here's what I want us to think about. He's out of referrals. I mean, after 38 years, his condition would be considered incurable and his case insolvable. But that's God's specialty. In the face of every diagnosis this invalid had been given, Jesus gives him this prescription, 8 words. Get up, pick up your mat, and I'm leaving my walk. 8 words. And here's another lesson. It doesn't matter how bad the diagnosis is or how long we've had the handicap. It's never too late when the Lord's involved. If we're breathing, God isn't through with us yet. And if we want a second chance, we need to seek a second opinion, and that opinion is God's opinion. We have a sign like this. Ours is red, though, and bigger, but in our house, God's got this. Wouldn't it be awesome? You ever thought about this? Wouldn't it be awesome if the Lord immediately healed every illness we ever had? I mean, no need for doctors, no need for hospitals, no need for insurance. Man, life would be grand, wouldn't it? For every story that we hear of a miraculous healing, there are thousands of other stories that don't turn out that way. Healing's the exception, not the rule. Now, we're going to look at that in more details in about 3 weeks, but just to throw that out there. But again, one of the main lessons for today, a rule of thumb, is this. God won't answer 100% of the prayers we don't pray. If we assume the answer is no, we don't even give God a chance to say yes, do we? And I don't know about you, but I need that remembrance. I mean, kind of a baseball analogy. Can you imagine a baseball player refusing to get into the batter's box because he didn't get a hit the last time he was up? Yet that's how many of us approach prayer. We let a few strikeouts keep us from swinging for the fences. And trust me, my prayer batting average is no better than anyone else's in here. I swing and miss all the time. But here's my thinking. If I'm going down swinging. I've told our grandsons this for years in baseball. This is my pet peeve when someone stands up there to bat and is wanting to walk. And I've always told them, you can never hit a ball you don't swing at. In baseball, great players also have to have a very short memory. But so do those with great faith. No matter how many times we feel like we've struck out in our prayer life, faith keeps swinging for the fences. And if we want to experience the miraculous, we have to come to terms with the fact that the who, what, when, where, how, they aren't up to us. They're up to God. I mean, this man had struck out so many times. I mean, we're talking about, remember, 38 years. I mean, I'm guessing his will and his emotional state was probably as paralyzed as his body was. Most of us, or maybe I should say I would, after 38 years, I would have given up. How about you? I've come to this conclusion too. I've been to so many doctors, I've decided I can be one. Y'all ever feel that way? Dr. Wilson. I'll give you some medical advice here in just a minute, but the good news, there's no deductibles, it's free of charge. But unless, if you want to give, go ahead, But also remember this, you usually get what you pay for. But anyway, let me tell you this story. November 2004, there's a group of elite medical researchers and practitioners. They had a conference at Rockefeller University in New York City. And the goal of gathering all these brilliant minds together in the world in one room was to try to tackle the healthcare crisis. But the outcome, it was encouraging and discouraging, really. It was encouraging because most health problems are not caused by factors beyond our control. That was their conclusion. But it's discouraging for that very same reason, and I'll explain that in a minute. The experts concluded that they could not fix most of our problems for us. Only we can fix them ourselves. But you know what the problem is? We choose not to. Study after medical study identifies 5 behavioral issues that cause, listen to this, 80% of health problems. 80% of health problems are due to these 5 things. Too much eating, too much drinking, too much smoking, too much stress, and not enough exercise. And after reading those, I thought, man, no wonder I'm always sick. But here's the thing, with a few minor changes. Here's the doctor and me talking. We could solve most of our major health problems. But you know what the bottom line is? We really don't want to. No matter what goal we're trying to achieve or problem we're trying to solve, we have to want it more than the pain that will be inflicted upon us in order to obtain it. Let me throw this statistic out at you. You can see on the board the 9 out of 10. That's where 9 out of 10 of us fall short. According to the dean of the Johns Hopkins Medical School, more than 1.5 million Americans each year undergo a coronary bypass graft, or we refer to it as an angioplasty, or angioplasty maybe. So while this angioplasty effectively relieves many of the symptoms of a clogged artery, it's just a temporary fix, is what they say. Without a change in eating and exercising, it's short-lived. And here's a quote from the dean. He says this: if you look at people after coronary artery bypass graft, 2 years later, 90% of them have not changed their lifestyle. If the numbers are right, he says, that means 9 out of 10 people would rather die than change. But I kind of think about that, and of course maybe that depends upon your age. But I'm thinking, would I rather die or give up Twinkies and Bluebell? So I don't know. But that brings us to this strange question that Jesus asked. Have you ever thought this is a strange question? It'd be kind of like walking into the doctor's office and he asks you, "Do you want to get well?" Well, I would want to smart off to him and say, "Well, duh. Why else would I be here?" And the question almost seems a little unkind. It's kind of like adding insult to injury. Of course he wants to get well. But that is not an assumption Jesus made. I mean, he knew better. Here's the thing. You cannot help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. Think about the other thief on the cross. The one who continued to hurl, insults at Jesus. I mean, here's a case in point. He's a few feet away from salvation, but he continued to curse the one who could have helped him. And as a minister, one of the painful truths through the years that I've come to realize is that some people want help, but others don't. I mean, they just don't want help. And we can't help those who won't help themselves. I don't care who they are. And it's easy to become accustomed to our crutches. Or in the case of this invalid, it's very easy for him to become accustomed to his mat. And according to the scholars of that day, they said that mat that he had was probably 2 feet by 4 feet. So think about that. His life each day consisted of 8 square feet. Can you imagine going through that same routine day after day? Talk about monotonous. But here's something to think about too. His mat may have become his security blanket. Physically, but most important, spiritually, if we want to get well, we can't keep sitting on our security blanket. We can't keep doing the same thing, going to the same places, hanging out with the same people. We've got to get rid of our mat. And our mat is whatever is standing in our way from being totally committed to God. I mean, so the question again, do you want to get well? I mean, that gets to really some deep-seated issues. For the invalid, getting well possibly meant, he's going to have to now get a job where he probably begged before his entire life. It meant actually using his healed legs. It meant a new level of responsibility in society. It meant a complete change in his life. And I think that's why Jesus asked him the tough question, do you want to get well? Because it meant changes were going to have to take place in his life. Let me ask us, do we want to get well? Are we willing to hand God the scalpel, the knife, and say, okay, God, you cut away from me whatever's standing in my way from serving you like I should? And that's tough love, isn't it? But sometimes you ever felt like I just need someone to whack me over the head with a 2x4? You ever felt that way? Or probably more like we'd rather hit someone else over the head with a 2x4. But anyway, that's a different story. It might injure our ego, but most importantly, it might also heal our souls. Isn't it true the best friends ask the toughest questions? Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. We can't surround ourselves with people who are going to sugarcoat everything. But are we humble enough to have someone in our lives who, when our mat is standing in our way from serving God, when we need to get up and walk, that they will tell us those things? And let me remind us, and I'm going to try to remind us this in every of these lessons on miracles, but we know this. Only God can perform miracles, but there's almost always a human element involved. Some miracles have tough love. Some miracles take time. Some take effort. Some miracles take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Now, when Jesus told the invalid to get up and walk. He's asking him again to do something he hasn't done in 38 years. The impossible. But that's what it takes if we want to experience the miraculous. We can't keep doing what we've always done. In fact, we might have to do something that we haven't done in a long, long time, or something maybe we've never done. Are we willing to change? Are we willing to take that first step of faith? You know, the fact that this guy's called an invalid is an important detail. I think, it kind of like, have you ever met someone and they say, oh, I'm a back sufferer, or, I have kidney issues. Hello, my name is Kidney Issue. But here's a lesson we can learn from that. Don't let what's wrong with us define us. That's not who we are. And our culture has a tendency to reduce people to labels. But don't let anyone label us other than the Lord. Because He tells us we're more than conquerors. We're the apple of His eyes. We're heirs with Christ. We are a child of God. On and on they go. This man had gone 38 years without being healed. And the emphasis is on the helplessness and hopelessness of this man. Jesus' selection of this man from the large number of sick people. And we don't know how many were there, but there's a lot because they think there were healing powers in that water. Helpless and hopeless. How do we deal with life when we feel that way? What if God had been silent to us for 38 years? How would we respond? Would we still say, God's for me? Let me close with this. Fanny Crosby, you remember she's the blind songwriter. She wrote this: chords that were broken will vibrate once more. Chords that were broken will vibrate once more. In other words, there's a lot of lessons there, but one of them is this: don't manufacture conclusions. Don't think of in terms as this is the way it's been and this is the way it's always going to be. Because God has a way of bringing beautiful vibes out of broken chords. Because when the Lord's involved, anything is possible. Maybe life has caused broken chords in us. And it may have been going on for months or years. We've got to remember the Lord can still heal us. Swing for the fences in our prayers. Remove